My name is Bartholomew Q. Hoofington, and I am a goat. This is not a metaphor. This is not some symbolic statement. I am 4 feet tall, covered in coarse off-white fur, and I once ate an entire lawn chair purely out of spite. For most of my life, I lived a simple existence on a modest hillside farm at the edge of a town called Gravel's End. Now, Gravel's End is special. It's run entirely by animals who all pretend they are not running it. The chickens? They handle local gossip, a non-stop flurry of clucks and whispers. The horses? Transportation, obviously. The cats are in charge of surveillance. They're silent, judging eyes missing nothing. And the dogs? They handle law enforcement, though it's mostly based on vibes and who looks guilty. And the goats? Well, the goats were ignored. Completely overlooked. Which is precisely why no one noticed when I began keeping notes. It all started innocently enough. I just began noticing patterns. The feed deliveries were always late on the 3rd Thursday of the month. The sheep council meetings consistently ended with fewer sheep than they began with, and nobody ever asked where the missing ones went. The pigeons up in the clock tower argued about what time it was like it was a matter of opinion. I started writing all these things down using little bits of charcoal on the back of discarded menus from the Raccoon Run diner. This, my friends, would later be referred to as the first mistake. The second mistake was learning to read. And I learned completely by accident. One of the library owls, a rather distinguished fellow named Professor Hootsworth, Ph.D., was reorganizing the lower shelves and dropped a book right on my head. The title was Civic Structures and Why They Inevitably Collapse. I opened it, and something just rewired in my brain. Suddenly, I understood forms, titles, systems, power. I realized that Gravel's End didn't have a mayor, not an official one anyway. It just had committees, councils, rotating chairs, and something they called temporary emergency leadership that never, ever seemed to end. And that meant one very important thing: there was a vacancy. The third mistake was asking a question out loud. I did it at the weekly water trough assembly. I stood up and said, as calmly as I could, I would like to know who, exactly, is in charge here. You could have heard a pin drop. The silence fell like a dropped anvil. The cows stopped chewing. The ducks froze mid-quack. A ferret fainted, though that might have been for unrelated reasons. Finally, the mayor pro tempore, a llama named Geraldine with excellent posture and zero accountability, cleared her throat. We handle things collectively, she said. That's not an answer, I replied. And that's when the cats started writing. By sunset, posters were everywhere. Elect Bartholomew Q. Hoofington, and underneath, a slogan, because at least he asked. I did not authorize this. I certainly didn't approve that slogan. And I didn't even know how to spell elect, so I knew it wasn't me. The election was held the very next morning. I won unanimously, mostly because the chickens voted 6 times each, and the dogs didn't really understand the concept of a ballot. By noon, I was being sworn into office using an acorn and a very nervous hedgehog. I was now mayor goat. And that's when things started getting weird. Every town has its secrets. Gravel's End, it turned out, had a basement. Literally. Underneath the old grain silo was a hidden staircase that only appeared if you stepped on the correct combination of loose floorboards. And I found it because, as a goat, I weighed just enough to trigger the mechanism. Down there was the archive, a dusty room filled with records dating back centuries. There were maps that didn't match the land. Laws that contradicted each other. Photographs of animals who had never existed. And right in the center of the room, there was a plaque. It said, "This town is not where IT thinks IT is." I laughed. And the room laughed back. Then the pigeons confessed. During an emergency session, I called about the town's inconsistent schedule. They explained that time was, in their words, flexible. The clock tower didn't measure time, it negotiated it. If things were going badly, they'd slow down Tuesdays to make them feel longer. If a festival was particularly profitable, they'd extend Saturdays. This explained a lot. I asked them to stop. They said no. So I fired them. In response, they just moved the clock tower. Next, I decided to audit the town finances, a phrase no goat should ever have to say. And I discovered that the sheep had invented something called wool coin. It was a decentralized barter system backed by nothing but confidence and lint. Half the town had invested. The other half were sheep. When I tried to shut it down, the sheep unionized, locked themselves up in the hills, and began chanting numbers. Just random numbers, not corresponding to anything. This, understandably, frightened everyone. Just when I thought I was getting a handle on things, a rival appeared. His name was Chadwick Hornwell. He had shinnier horns, a smug smile he wore constantly, and he promised things like streamlined governance and less yelling. The town loved him. I challenged him to a debate. He challenged me to a headbutt. I won the headbutt, but the crowd cheered for him anyway. That's when I realized that in Gravel's End, democracy was optional. And then the river started talking. It spoke to me on a Thursday. Not loudly, just casually, like it had been waiting its turn to join the conversation all this time. "Don't trust the owls," it whispered. I asked why. "They remember versions of the town you never lived in," it said. I asked if the river was sentient. It replied, "That's a rude question." My mayoral duties continued. The dogs found an old rule book and completely misunderstood it. By sunset, the entire town was under accidental martial law. Everyone had to wear reflective vests and walk only in a clockwise direction. Bark permits were issued. Curfews were enforced. One squirrel was even arrested for looking suspiciously diagonal. I had to repeal the order. The dogs apologized and gave everyone treats to make up for it. The treats were expired. Then one morning, the town began growing new streets. They weren't built, they grew. Cobblestone veins snaked outward from the town center, leading absolutely nowhere. Houses just shifted on their foundations to accommodate them. The map was rewriting itself in real time. Back in the archive, a new line appeared on the records under my name. It said, "Status, temporary. All goats are." I did not like the sound of that. That night, I stood on the same hill where I used to just graze and be a simple goat. Below me, Gravel's End was humming. It wasn't a peaceful hum. It was an anticipatory one. The river whispered secrets to the reeds. The pigeons were arguing with the moon. The sheep were still up in the hills, chanting decimals. And somewhere deep beneath the town, I could feel something large turn over in its sleep. I chewed thoughtfully on a fence post and realized, far, far too late, that I had made a critical error. I had only ever asked who ran this town. I had never, ever thought to ask what kind of town this was, and I had a terrible feeling that I was about to find out. Thanks for watching. If you want to see what happens next in the unhinged saga of Mayor Goat, be sure to like and subscribe for part 2. Trust me, things are about to get much, much worse.